Hello, everybody. I'm Linda Bylander. I coordinate the Becoming Outdoor Woman program for the Minnesota DNR. And joining us today, I'm very, very happy to present Desiree Holmberg. Desiree has been a longtime volunteer for the Becoming Outdoor Woman program, and she's passionate about archery and helping women get involved in archery. And I have some special women on the webinar today watching as part of our archery series. So welcome to all the women who are part of our archery series. And if you are a woman interested in archery hunting, give me a call or email me at linda.bylander@state.mn.us, and I'll tell you about the archery series. But Desiree is going to kick off our series today with um, how to pick out a bow and basics of bow hunting. So with that, and Desiree is also works for Archery Country. So she's running our first session for the Women of the Archery Series at Archery Country in March. So with that, welcome Desiree.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here. My name is Desiree. I have been a volunteer with the bow program for over 10 years. I actually got started with the bow program because I attended a workshop in college on a scholarship, basically to learn how to snowmobile. And after that workshop, I loved everyone that was involved, and I got an email about joining the board. So I decided to do that and have been helping coordinate workshops since then. Um, it's actually funny because when I was in college, I was on like a date with my now husband, and he was very into archery in high school and was really good. So we decided that I would borrow my brother's bow and go to the archery shop and shoot archery with him. And I had a really terrible experience. The bow that I had wasn't fit for me. And I actually, when I was pulling back the string on the bow, I pulled the trigger of my release and ended up knocking myself in the face and getting a big fat lip, bleeding everywhere. And that was kind of traumatizing for me. I was super embarrassed, ran into the bathroom, and never really wanted to pick up a bow after that again until I saw some women teaching the archery class at one of our workshops and was introduced to this archery series that the bow program does. So I bought a bow in 2016, and that was just after I had my second child. So I bought the bow thinking, okay, I have no idea if I'm going to have time for this, but I'm going to buy a bow and do this program and we'll see where it goes. Um, and I ended up falling in love with it. It's turned into a passion of mine. And for a while, I stayed home with my kids, and that was what I did. Um, I would drop my daughter off at preschool, and then I'd go to the archery range and shoot my bow and then go back and pick her up. And it just sort of morphed from there. And now I actually work at Archery Country doing social media. So I get to see all the fun new things that are coming. So my intention with this program is really to give you a general overview of some archery equipment so that when you walk into an archery shop, you don't feel overwhelmed by all the words. There's a lot of acronyms and different things. I just want you to have a general idea. Um, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the regulations for Minnesota when it comes to bow hunting. For turkey and deer, you have to pull no less than 30 pounds at before full draw. Um, you also have to Your broadheads have at least two metal cutting edges, which I'll show you on a slide when we talk about broadheads further down. And they also have to have a diameter of at least 7/8 of an inch. Expandable broadheads may be used to take big game, but they have to have, like they said, the two cutting edges. And then for big game, they cannot have no more than 2 inches in width at or after impact, and they cannot have barbs. one of the questions that we get pretty regularly about transporting bows is if they have to be in a case, and they do not, as long as they do not have an arrow or a bolt in them. And this last regulation is something that we actually found out right before this class, is that you do have to have a firearm safety certificate if you were born after December 31st of 1979. So, okay, so the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to purchasing a bow is, maybe you already know this if you've shot archery before, but you really need to determine, just like with a gun, which eye is your dominant eye. I'm going to have Benji put out the link for this YouTube video. So if you're not sure, if you haven't tested your eye dominance, make sure to do that before you go into an archery shop. It's important because it might be easier for you to shoot left-handed if you're left eye dominant. But you really just want to know, so that way when you're talking to the staff there, they can say, okay, we might have to set up two different kinds of bows for you, a left and a right-handed. Next, I'm just going to go over the basic bow anatomy. So this is a bow with no accessories on it. These are the limbs of the bow. There's two limbs. There's a top one and a bottom one. And then this is the riser, this entire piece here. This is a grip. The cables, there are two cables that run. One goes from here to here, the other one goes from here to here. This is the string. And then this is the string stop. And these are circles here are what they call the cams. These rotate on the bow. And I have a video of that coming up here. Also on the string, there's going to be this darker string. It wraps around the string. This is called the serving. This loop right here is called the D loop, and that is what you attach your release to. And then this right here is the peep sight. This is what you'll look through to see the pins of your sight. And this video is just a video to show you exactly how the cables and the string work together. And this will make a little more sense on my next slide. I'm going to talk about bow let off and specs of bows. So I just want you guys to see how this works. So as you pull the string back, these cables pull too, which takes some of the weight. That and the construction of the cam here takes some of the weight off, and that is called let off. Now, a lot of times when you go into a bow shop, all the tags on the bows will say certain specifications. One of the specifications that they talk a lot about is brace height, and the brace height is just the length from the deepest part of the grip to the string. And the way that that plays a part in your bow is that, especially as a new person that might still be working on their archery form, a little bit longer of a brace height is going to be a little bit more forgiving for any movements that you make as you're letting go of that string. So a little bit longer of a brace height is better for new people, but you really just want to make sure to try a lot of different bows and feel them for yourself. The next spec that you see a lot about is axle to axle length. So that's basically the length from each axle in the middle of the cams. Now, you'll see target archers, they'll have a lot longer axle to axle length, but they are not bow hunting. So a lot of people, the axle to axle length is something that you want to keep in mind and think about what kind of hunting you're going to do. If you're in a blind, a shorter axle to axle length might be something that you're going to want because it'll be a little less clunky. But sometimes your axle to axle length will have to be long if your draw length is long, which is the next specification that we're going to talk about. So your draw length is specific to each archer. It's basically the length that, like how far you pull your bow back. And this is something that they can measure for you at the pro shop, or if you want to have some idea of what your draw length might be, you can measure your wingspan, like finger to finger, tip to tip, and then divide that by 2.5, and that will give you a rough estimate. But your draw length is really, it's not just your draw length, but it's going to have to do with your, it's going to be a combination of your release, your D-loop, and your draw length. And the best way to get consistency in your shots is going to be to make sure that your draw length is set specifically to you. And they can do that at the archery shop. They can watch you shoot. They can see if it's a little short, a little long. But if you want to have a general idea of your draw length, just you could just do the math that I was talking about before. The other thing that you're going to see a lot on the bows is they're going to talk about speed or IBO rating, or what's the other one? The ASA rating. Now that's just a general, it's basically a standard that they put their bows at, they shoot them, and then they record their speed. It's probably not going to be super important for someone who's new, but as you get into archery, some people really want speed and they want to look at that spec. The other thing that you're going to see is this let off. Now this is the percent of the draw weight that gets let off when you come to full draw. And that's the amount of weight that you'll be holding back. Again, it's a feel thing. You want to really go to a shop and try to shoot a couple different bows so you can feel what that let off feels like. Okay, so this is a photo of the accessories on the bow. So here's the arrow rest, and that sits right here. And here's a better picture of it here. That is where the arrow goes. This is a sight right here. This is a stabilizer. Whoop. Didn't mean to do that, sorry. This is a stabilizer, and then this is a quiver that's attached right here that holds the arrows. Now there are kind of 3 different categories of bows that you'll see at a shop. There's a ready to hunt or ready to shoot bow, and those are bows that generally come with a sight, an arrow rest, a stabilizer, a quiver. They usually don't come with an arrow release or case, so those are other things that you might need to buy. And their price range is usually about $350 to maybe $500. The next kind of range of bows, you'll see these mid-range bows that are anywhere from $400 to $1,000, and that is just the bow itself. That's no accessories. So oftentimes archery shops will have packages of accessories that you can add to these bows, or you can choose accessory by accessory and decide what you like and what you want. It just might be a little more expensive. And then our third category is the flagship bows. Now these are the bows that get released every year, and these are the latest and the greatest technologies. And a new one comes out every year. A lot of people get a new bow and trade it in the next year for the new one, but they are expensive. The next thing we're going to talk about is the release. A release is something that you use on your hand that goes on the D loop and allows you to draw. The one that's most common is this wrist release here. And I found this great video of how you put it on. But basically you put this on, you open up the release, you attach it to that D loop that we talked about earlier. And then you put your finger behind the trigger and pull it back until you get to full draw. And then you slowly and smoothly pull that trigger to release the arrow. There's two other kinds of releases here. These are a little more complicated, so I'm not really going to get into them, but just know that they exist. There's a hinge release and a thumb button. And if you ever want to try one of these, going to a pro shop, usually they have them around and you can, they can show you how to use them if you are interested in trying. But they're a little more, this hinge release is one that it's activated to release by the angle that, I'm trying to say it and show it, but by the angle of your grip. So as that release hinges forward, that release opens up and lets the arrow fly. And the thumb button is one where you push that button with your thumb and it will release the arrow. Now there are two kinds of arrow rest options. This whisker biscuit, there's a lot of different brands of whisker biscuits, but this is called the whisker biscuit. And this is a perfectly fine rest to have, but you just have to know that if you're drawing a lower draw weight, having contact with your arrow, having contact with these bristles might slow the speed a little bit. So if you shoot a high poundage, you're probably okay, but if you're looking to gain speed and you have a lower draw weight, a drop away rest might be a better fit because there's just less contact. And anytime that you have less contact with other parts of the bow and your arrow, the better, because it's gonna fly faster. So the way a drop away rest works is the arrow sits here as you pull back. When you release, this flap here lowers and your arrow flies. This is one of the biggest things when people want to make a change on their bow. Changing from a whisker biscuit to a drop away rest is one of the first things that most archery shops suggest. Now we're going to get into sights. So there are lots of different kinds of sights, and there's a lot of different moving pieces to sights. The most common one is a fixed pin sight. These can have anywhere from 1 pin to 5 pins, 7 pins. It really just depends on what the preference of the person that is shooting. But the way this works is these pins are here and you can adjust each of them individually to 20, 30, 40 yards. Some of those, the ready to hunt packages that I talked about earlier that come with accessories on them will usually come with a fixed pin sight. And these are okay, but what I found with mine, because I initially bought a ready to hunt bow, is that when you're trying to sight in your bow, it doesn't have micro adjust, so you have to actually take your Allen wrench and turn it out, and it will go up and down, and it's hard to figure out how far up and down you went. So some of these other bows, as you get up in price range or you upgrade your items, like those are some of the things that are added on to the newer sights. But I used a fixed pin sight for a long time. It worked, but I found it frustrating to get sighted in. So some of the sights that have micro adjust are much easier for new people who are not sure how far to move their pins. It's just easier. Otherwise, there's another kind of easy way that you can do it is just get like a silver pen and mark where your pin was at, and then when you have to go adjust it, you'll know exactly where it was and whether you should adjust it up and down. The other option for sights is a slider or a movable sight. Now, this is one pin, and then depending on how fast your bow is, there'll be different, this is called the sight tape that they'll put on. And this is something that needs to be set up by, I would highly, highly suggest be set up by your pro shop, because it can be a little complicated. So this is your sight tape, and it'll tell you like how many yards. So you have to range your target, figure out how far away it is, and then rotate that sight tape to 30 yards, and then your pin will be on 30 yards. And then there's another one that's kind of a hybrid. So for those people that want to hunt, but maybe also want to shoot 3D target archery far away, you can have your 20, 30, or 30, 40 pin. And then this one, bottom pin, is the one that uses this, a wheel. So you could go out to 80 yards or 100 yards. The next accessory on the bow that you'll see is stabilizers. So there's a front stabilizer and a back stabilizer. Not everyone has a back stabilizer, or a back bar, they call it. A lot of hunting bows have a front stabilizer. It's not something that you have to have, but it can make your shots a lot more stable. But when you're shopping for a stabilizer for bow hunting, you're going to want to think again, much like the axle to axle length, about the space that you have. If you're going to be in a blind, you might not want a super long stabilizer in the front of your bow. You might want it a little bit shorter. And a lot of stabilizers, it's going to be a personal preference. So you're going to want to put it on your bow, try it out. I actually have a link to a really good article from Matthews that talks about choosing stabilizers for your bow. And Benji should have that in the chat. So okay, I'm not going to talk too much about arrows, because arrows are going to be very specific to the person, because there's a lot to be considered when buying arrows. And I would suggest, as a new person, to definitely go to a pro shop to talk to them about which arrows would be best for what you plan on doing with that bow. I see it often where people will go to the range and they'll find arrows and they'll be really excited about it because arrows are kind of expensive. And but it's not a good idea to shoot arrows. You want to shoot all the same arrow for consistency. If you find an arrow at the range, it's probably not going to be the same weight. It's not going to be the same setup. It's not going to be the same length. It's going to shoot very different than the other arrows that you have. So you always want to shoot the same kind of arrow to keep consistency. Archery is all about consistency, including like form. It's about repeating the same thing over and over and over again. The next thing to talk about is broadheads, which we had talked about in the regulations. This is an expandable broadhead. These are the blades, and they kind of fold up, and then as that broadhead hits the target, they fold out and then make a cut. The other option is this fixed blade broadhead, which I suggest for people who shoot like a lower weight. I've seen these broadheads be shot for people that pull like 30, 35 pounds, and sometimes they don't get the penetration that you're looking for. So if you have a lower draw weight, look at fixed blade broadheads. If you have a higher draw weight, you might want to do an expandable. But again, this is a great question for your pro shop people, because they see the photos every year of people bow hunting, and they can tell you which broadheads are the most lethal. So here are some tips that I've learned from doing this, and I really struggled for a long time because I bought the ready to hunt bow. I really didn't let my husband help me at all with trying to figure out how to sight things in or watch me or anything because I didn't want him to have anything to do with it. So I struggled through a lot. I didn't really feel comfortable going to a pro shop. And there was a lot of things that I think I could have fixed faster had I had someone who could give me some insight. So I would say if you want to bow hunt, buy a bow early and practice as often as possible. Archery is a game of um, just repeating and then also getting out of your head when you see a big buck or a deer and you get excited, or you'll even see it at the when you're shooting target is you might shoot really well one week and then the next week you maybe get a little target panic and you have to work through it. So you want to just keep practicing as often as possible. And you really don't want to start at your highest draw weight. So if you know you can pull back 60 but it's hard, don't start at 60, start at 50, start at 55 and then slowly work your way up, because that's another thing that's seen a lot is people will get burned out. They'll injure themselves because they're trying to pull too much weight too fast. And you can always incrementally move that weight up if you need to. But you can't, if you injure yourself, it's going to take a long time to heal. So a great way to learn more about archery and just how to shoot is to join, like, to go to 3D archery shoots, join a paper target league, join a 3D league, because this kind of commits you to practicing once a week or once every other week. And then also those 3D leagues are so great because you have to practice learning how far away a target is, which is something that happens all the time when you're hunting. Is a deer will come out and it might be 23 yards or 32 yards. Well, if you're only practicing at the range and it's 10, 20, 30 yards, you're not going to know where to aim on that animal. So that's where 3D leagues and 3D shoots come in. The other tip that I would say is a really good one is to practice the same way that you intend on hunting. So if you intend on hunting from a ground blind, practice from a ground blind. Practice with your broadhead. Take one of your broadheads and use that, because your arrow can fly differently with a broadhead than a field tip. And you want to make sure that you catch any tuning or adjustments that you might need before you go out and hunt. If you're going to hunt from a tree stand, try shooting from a tree stand. If you're going to hunt in the cold, then you're going to have layers of clothing on, or gloves, or a face mask. One of my friends was hunting this year and she was wearing her glasses and she had a face mask. She put her face mask up and she went to shoot. She breathed out and her glasses fogged up and she couldn't take the shot. So you really want to try to practice in the most realistic scenario that you can get. The other thing is you really want to study the vitals of the species that you're hunting. That way you know what angles will hit what organs. And if you maybe don't hit where you wanted to, you can think about the organs that you may have hit and how long to let that animal sit before going and seeing if it's expired. One thing that's really helped me with that too is using lighted knocks, because it's easier to see where you hit the animal when you have a lighted knock. At least I think so. Sometimes when you're shooting in lower light conditions or something in the background, it all happens so fast and it's hard to remember where you hit that animal. Otherwise, really just go out and try it. Go to a shop, even if you don't know if you want to buy a bow, go shoot a bow, see how it feels, um, and have fun, because that's what it's all about. So the next steps after this is for the women that are on here that are doing the turkey hunting archery series. These are all the sessions. You can contact Linda to register for one or all of them. And for everyone else, the next steps is really, I would suggest going to your local archery shop. Your local archery shop does this in and out every day. And big box stores are great, and you can buy things online and maybe save a little money, but the archery pro shops are the place that are going to make sure that you get the bow set up perfectly to you, which will then make you more successful and want to shoot more. There's nothing worse than being frustrated. So go to your local archery shop and then enroll if you don't already have your firearm safety, enroll in firearm safety and bow hunter education. I think that's all I've got for you guys. So bring on the questions.
Thanks very much, Desiree. And just to reiterate, definitely go to a pro shop, and they're there to help you. The women in the archery series will be going to 2 different pro shops just to make sure that they have the right fit for their bow. And also, firearm safety is required to buy a bow hunting license in Minnesota if you're born after 79, but not the bow hunter ed course. That is other states require that, but not Minnesota. But you definitely do need the firearm safety if you're born after 79. So the questions that we have, thank you very much, Desiree. It was a great viewpoint from a beginner that now that you've learned and sharing it with other beginners, I think that's a great way of learning is through someone who's learned it themselves. So the first question is, why do some folks get new bows every year? Do they wear out, or are people just excited about new tech and gear?
It's definitely a new tech and gear kind of thing. Some people just love to have the latest and greatest. I've seen people that have the same bow for 20 years and they come in every couple years to get it restrung. So it's definitely not a necessity. It's just people get into it and they want to try out what's new.
Okay, can you hunt with a recurve? Oops, I just lost the question because something else come up. Can you hunt with a recurve bow, and what are the advantages or disadvantages?
You absolutely can hunt with a recurve bow as long as you're pulling over 30 pounds. The advantages to a recurve bow is that it is initially less expensive to get into recurve, but recurve and bare bow, they call bare bow archery, is significantly more challenging because it is way more about your form. And compound bows allow, you to not have to think about holding all that weight back. You have your release, so it's everything that is in a compound bow is designed to help you with consistency, and recurve is a lot more about form, your own personal physical form, and being able to replicate that over and over again, and you don't have any assistance of mechanics. That makes sense.
Another thing about recurve is to think about if you're going to hunt from a blind, you really can't with a recurve bow. It's just too big unless you get a special blind. Um, how expensive are the trade-in bows from the expensive type bows? I guess how expensive are trade-in bows? And what do you think about people borrowing somebody's bow?
So I think the hard part about borrowing someone's bow is that the person that you're borrowing from may not have the same draw length, same draw weight. Their peep isn't going to be set to your peep height. Everything in a bow is very fit to the archer because it's about consistency, and every person's body is a little bit different. So it's hard to borrow a bow. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you could borrow a bow and bring it into a shop and have them set it up for you, they're going to charge you to do that, but it's an option. The other thing about that is same with buying a used bow. I would suggest not buying a used bow from anywhere other than a shop because you likely won't know what to look for when it comes to like if someone has dry fired that bow or there's a bend in a cam or a split limb or something like that. Those are things that are not necessarily that you're going to be able to see right away to the naked eye to someone who's new to archery. So if you are going to buy a used bow, buy it from a bow shop if they sell used bows. Um, and you can borrow it. It's just I would take it to a shop to get it specifically fit to you so that you have a real, otherwise you're going to struggle. If it's fit to you, you won't struggle as much. You'll have a better time.
And how expensive are the bows that the people who trade up every year? How
Mm-hmm.
expensive are the trade-in bows? Or does that just vary?
It varies by, oftentimes it can vary by the time of year. If a trade-in bow comes in, like if a new bow comes in before the next year's bow, it'll might be a little more expensive. But when the next year's bows release, then the value kind of goes down a little bit. It's all by supply and demand for those kinds of things.
Okay, the next question is from Caitlin. Recommendations for where to practice in the way that you are hunting. Example, if you turkey hunt 5 hours up north in a blind, is there some place where you could set up your blind and practice that is closer?
Well, outdoor ranges, I mean, you might kind of feel goofy doing it, but you can. Nobody's gonna, you can take your blind to the range, set it up on the line, shoot out of the blind that way. Um, you can't, you cannot practice on public land. So just know that you might have to, ask a friend if they have land or there are quite a few public ranges that you should be able to go to. And I'm actually working on a list of public ranges for archery country. So eventually that'll come out as a blog and I can send it over to you guys if you are interested in that. But that would be my suggestion.
Okay, Casey asks, I've heard it's really bad to pull back and let go of the bow without an arrow. I was wondering if that was true. If so, why?
Yes, so that is actually called dry firing a bow, and it is the number one rule um, of not to do with the bow. The reason why is because as you're drawing that bow back, you're generating a lot of energy, and that energy, when there's an arrow in the bow, will cause that arrow to fly. Well, when there's not an arrow in the bow, what happens is all that energy gets absorbed into the limbs. It can crack limbs, it can bend. I've seen cams completely bent, and it can actually be really dangerous for the person who dry fires the bow because the whole bow can just almost explode. So don't dry fire your bow. Don't ever pull back a bow without an arrow in it.
Elena asks, I've been shooting a bare bow recurve as my first bow for a little over a year. It has a 35-pound draw weight. My draw length is about 25 pounds, which reduces the overall power of my shot. Should I consider increasing my draw weight to 45 pounds?
That is going to be dependent upon you and your body, really. It might it might be easier to go to a compound bow if you're having a hard time increasing to that weight. It's really going to depend. I think 45 pounds and having to hold back 45 pounds to me seems like a lot of weight. Now, I don't know how muscular you are, so maybe you're just have way more muscles than me and can do it. But I would say you want to make sure that the more weight you pull back, the more power that arrow is going to have. So if you want to hunt, you're going to want to you got to get past that 30 pounds, and if you can get over as high as you can get, that's going to be a more ethical hunting situation.
So legally, they have to pull back at least 30 pounds, but that's like
Yes,
that's the minimum
that's the
legal.
minimum. Yep.
Yeah, but the more weight, the more lethal that shot will be.
Yes, because the whole idea is when you're hunting is you really want to have what we call a pass through where the arrow goes through the animal and passes out the backside. And the lower weight you have, if you run into a bone or something like that, it won't necessarily pass through. And it's more ethical to try to get that pass through.
Okay, another question she has is about broadheads. What kind of targets should you get to practice shooting with broadheads?
So broadheads, you don't want to practice on the hay bale kinds of targets. So what I would suggest is there's a couple different brands, but they're like a foam target that you can shoot your broadhead into. And most of the pro shops have them. They might have a couple different kinds, but they'll be foam and they are going to rip up your target. But as some of the guys in my shop say, is accuracy is worth it.
Holly asked, would you recommend new arrows before the hunt?
I would recommend that you get arrows that you are going to hunt with a ways before the hunt. So I wouldn't say you have to have new arrows, but you do want to have some time with those arrows so you know how they fly and so that you have time to put your broadhead on and shoot with them. So they don't necessarily have to be new.
You just need to practice.
You just
Mary,
need to
thank
practice.
you for an excellent answer. But Sarah asked, do you have to buy a bow to take classes, or are there places that provide bows for learning? And do you know of classes that are good for total beginners? Well,
Um,
just to say, the archery series for your session, March, I think it's 12, and for the A1 archery session, they can borrow bows, correct? To try
mhm.
it out.
Yep. And there's not a lot of places. The reason why there's not a lot of places that you can rent Genesis bows, but those are like under 30 pounds worth of they're used mostly as a way to train people on how to work on their form. Um, but there's not a lot of places that allow you to rent bows before. Our shop does have a few. I think we're full though now on classes. But because each bow is so specifically set up to that person, it can take some time. So some shops don't have the time to have 10 people get their bows set up. But just if you want to email me, uh this QR code has my digital business card, and if you want to talk about equipment or different options, I can get together a list for you of places.
And I also know that like Three Rivers Park District offers archery classes where they provide the Genesis bows. When the Becoming Outdoor Woman offers archery classes, we have the Genesis bows. Actually, I think Desiree has our Genesis bows,
Yep.
and she takes women out all the time. So that's a way to at least try archery with a Genesis bow to see if you even want to go that next step. But look at some of the local parks. Usually, state parks have the archery in the parks that you can try archery as well. How Lindsay asked, how often should arrows be updated? Are there safety and performance issues with old arrows?
So arrows need to probably be updated. It really depends on how you shoot. If you're really accurate and you've been shooting the same spot and you can hear your arrows kind of slapping together, and you haven't been checking them every single time you pull them out, you might want to bring your arrows to a shop and they can look at them and tell you like, oh, these are too old, or they're looking weak, or there's a spot here or there that is because if you shoot, like when I started to get more accurate, I would shoot a 5-spot target. So I would shoot one arrow in each of the 5 spots so that I would avoid slapping arrows and save them. Because if your arrow hits the other arrow, it might not look like there's anything going on, but you actually have to take the arrow and kind of bend it and hear and listen for cracks. And that's a safety thing. So if you're practicing, make sure every time you pull out your arrows that you're checking them for any nicks, or just give them a little bend and twist, and you'll be able to hear it. But if you're not sure, just bring them into the shop and they'll check them.
Emily asks, what's a good way to increase your weight to pull back?
Practicing. Start out low and then slowly, incrementally, maybe a half pound, every 2 weeks. That's kind of how I did it.
Someone asked for the link for the bow archery sessions, upcoming events. I'm going to give you my email address. It's Linda, Linda Bylander, Bylander @state.mn.us. I have all the information to register for that. And Desiree is going to be our session number 2. She's going to do it at Archery Country in Rogers. And it's a great way for beginners to feel comfortable going to the archery shop for the first time, because archery shops are the best place to get into archery.
And I have 5 spots left. So if it fills and you don't get in, just email me and I'll figure something out.
Holly also asked, how far out should you wax your strings before the hunt?
String waxing actually doesn't need to be done as much as a lot of people think. If you see them start to fray, you can wax them. I mean, some people get really crazy about waxing them and want to wax them after every time they shoot. That's not really necessary, but if it makes you feel good, you can do it. It's never going to hurt to wax your string. So,
Okay, they put my email in the chat function, or if you hit the Q code for Desiree, she knows how to get a hold of me too, if you're
yes.
interested in the archery series that's coming up. I think that's all the questions I have, unless any went to.
I had a couple that came to me in the chat, Linda.
Okay.
In one of them, I just dealt with this a year or two ago. How often do you change your bowstring? Is that the same for a crossbow?
Um, so bowstrings, the suggestion is 2 to 3 years. As long as you're not seeing any obvious signs. Because your bow, and it also has to do with how you store your bow. Your bowstring, if you are constantly leaving your bow in your car where it's really hot, or in a shed where it can get really cold, all those temperature fluctuations, up and down, back and forth, can make your string stretch over time. And so we suggest usually 2 to 3 years. A crossbow, that is actually going to have a lot to do with how many arrows you put through it, and storage, the same thing. But I would say crossbow probably needs to be checked more often than a bow. And if you're like, I'm not sure, people bring their bows and their crossbows in all the time just to get it looked over, and the guys will say, "Oh no, your string looks fine," or "Yeah, you definitely need to get it changed."
One of the questions and one of the comments in the chat was, where do we find the people that are getting their new bows every year so they can buy the old ones? So I brought my bow in last year to think about upgrading it or selling it, or at least putting a new string on it, because it's been several years, and that's what was recommended to me was just what you were saying about replacing the string. And I see somebody just put in the Q&A, how much does that cost? I
String.
think they told me about $100 to get that all done, but
Yeah, so string and labor can be anywhere from $150 to $200. Like with the string plus labor costs of putting it on. So
because typically it's not something you can do at your house. So it's something
no.
that has to be done at a shop. So
Yeah, and that's because you need a bow press to press the bow down and release the string. It's not something we suggest people who don't know do themselves, because it can be dangerous. So
And Zach was wondering about estimating his draw weight before going into a shop. I don't know if you have any suggestions on that.
You know, here's what I suggest. I suggest you go in to a shop and they will just set it up to like a lower weight, like 30 or 40 pounds, and then shoot that and see. If you can't pull it back, they can lower it. Those, especially those ready to hunt bows or those lower scaled, those are usually adjustable from anywhere from like 7 pounds up to 70 pounds. So it doesn't take a lot of effort for them to change that draw weight.
Great. And I think you touched on this. I've been doing a lot of stuff in the background here, but where to practice? And Mary was asking about where to practice. State parks, and Linda mentioned one. I know Afton over by me has a target range at it. And can we practice in our backyards in the metro area? And I was going to write back to her, and I'll let you answer that one first.
So you definitely want to check your city ordinance. Like I live in Champlin, I cannot shoot in my backyard. But in Brooklyn Park, there's an archery range that's not that far away from me. But you definitely want to check your city ordinances. And if your city is okay with it, you really need to be careful about the backdrop in which you're shooting. The last thing you want is to accidentally have an arrow go off and hit the neighbor's house. So, or hit a person. So just make sure to check your ordinances and make sure there's a safe backdrop behind wherever you're going to be shooting.
It's a great answer. I know I used to be able to shoot. I live over in Hudson, and they changed the laws about 4 years ago to outlaw or not allow backyard archery practice. So, but they did put a range in town, so it works for everybody. I think that's the only questions I had that I saw in the chat. So a lot of great comments though. So thank you so much for doing this presentation and all the great tips and knowledge you shared.
No problem. And if you're thinking about something later and questions come up, feel free to contact me. Like I said, this QR code is my digital business card. It's got my phone number. It's got my phone number on there, my email address. And if I can't find the answer, I work with a bunch of people that usually can. So reach out.
I really think archery is one of those awesome sports that you don't have to hunt or even want to do hunting, but it's a great way to get outside, practice your concentration, just clear your mind, and either indoor ranges or outdoor ranges. It's a fun thing to do with friends or family, and just to get out and do some target practicing and just be outside. So
yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Desiree. And if you've never had attended a bow workshop, Desiree is usually at our workshops as well, and she usually is teaching archery. So thank you very much, Desiree. I really appreciate it. And if you are interested in the archery series, email me or use the Q code on Desiree and she can find me. So thank you everybody for attending.
thanks everyone.
Thanks.
We were just before 12 o'clock, and I just want to make a quick announcement. This is our last one of our winter session, our last Moss program. So if you're looking forward to Moss Spring Session 2022, it starts next week with sturgeon management and how to catch them. Linda, you're going to be doing that one again, so another exciting program. So if you visit our website, I put a link in the chat. You can go on there and register for those. So we have a great spring lineup coming up. Again, it starts next week. So we look forward to seeing everybody again. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll head to the back room.
Thank you.
Thanks.